This posture, though, is basically what people looking for warblers during the fall end up in most of the time. And there's a fun term, warbler neck, that has come from people with sore, achy necks trying to spend too much time identifying birds, warblers, as they're moving about to the top of the canopy. So over the course of the next 3 weeks or so, warbler migration is going to peak, and these treetops are going to just be alive with birds moving across them, foraging rapidly throughout the day to fuel their nocturnal migration journeys as they head from parts of northern North America. So we've got lots of birds passing through that nested in boreal Canada, all the way to Central and South America. So about mid-September to late September is when songbird diversity peaks for migration, and many of those are warbler species that we see. So these birds will be moving through, trying to gorge themselves on insects and caterpillars to build up those fat reserves, because they make extended journeys at night. So they're eating during the day, a little time for rest, and then right around sunset, or right after sunset, they're taking off into the night sky and flying all night long, and will make landfall right before dawn the next morning.
Is that a security thing to fly at night? It's just safer for predators?
Yeah, there's fewer predators out, really. A lot of their predators during migration are raptors, and they're not active at night. You can't see them, so yeah, it helps them a lot. It also tends to be calmer during that time as well, and they have evolved a lot of navigation cues, so they use star fields and lunar paths to help orient them, kind of like early sailors did. So there are lots of competing theories as to why the songbirds migrate at night. It's probably not one or the other, it's probably a combination of all of those factors. Most of the songbirds migrate at night. Interestingly, some of the shorter distant migrants, and it depends on taxonomic group, like all the swallows are diurnal migrants, so they're migrating during the day. Why that is, I'm not exactly sure. It could be some distance, but we do have short distance migrants that migrate at night as well. Species like yellow-rumped warbler, which nests in Canada and overwinters in Ohio. Actually, late in the fall, that's one that we get as a later warbler migrant in October, and even into November we can get some yellow-rumped warblers, and they'll hang around in parts of Ohio throughout the winter. So we've got one of our first long-distance migrants. What we have here is a female black-throated blue warbler migrating through. So one of the very first warblers that I've seen this fall that's come through. We have one nest record of black-throated blue warbler in Ohio, and it's around the Cleveland area. This is more of a boreal breeding species. This is a female, and it's she's in her basic non-breeding plumage. So very dull overall. What helps me identify that, what's unique about black-throated blue warblers compared to some of the other species, is they have a white spot on their wing. It's really easy to pick up. Males and females have that. And that's what I caught a glimpse of as she was moving through this understory. So this bird is coming from Canada. It was probably not here yesterday. Probably arrived overnight, and she's just foraging as she moves on her long journey to overwinter in South America. She had that white spot, so actually probably an adult bird, so not born this year, because it was pretty visible. And that's fall birding moving right through, but you don't hear that exciting song. I mean, the song of the black-throated blue warbler is unique. It's this raspy beer. slower is often more typical. And warbler songs, a lot of people complain about warblers being some of the tricky birds to identify. I think that's because there's such a diverse group. There's so many of them, and that can be overwhelming. And they move so quickly. But their vocalizations are so unique generally, especially compared to sparrows that all have these little buzzy trills that can be really difficult to distinguish. But warblers, for the most part, have very unique songs. And so that was one of the first groups that I learned well, just because they're so unique. I mean, there are a couple species that have similarities to black-throated blue warbler, alternate songs of cerulean warbler or northern parula sometimes get confused for black-throated blue. But, I mean, there you're talking about maybe at most 3 species, and there's some things you can talk about or think through about the differences. Whereas, the swallows, they don't have much in the way of vocalizations, call notes. Those can be learned as well. There are differences in the call notes between tree swallow and northern ruffling swallow. Tree swallows, for instance, sound like they have a mouthful of liquid. Just this really rich, juicy call. But warblers are really easy for their songs. But fall, none of them are vocalizing. They're just silently moving through, getting as much fat put on their body as possible. So they're going to load up fat kind of in their chest area and along their flanks, and they'll burn that off overnight as they're flying. Birds can double their weight almost in fat.
Really?
Like quilts, yeah. One of the things we look for, so I mentioned earlier that we're also doing some bird banding right now. My wife and I run a station in southern Ohio, and we look at the body condition of birds, and fat is one thing that we check for. And so we're starting to get some migrants. And so we're starting to see these bulges of fat, and you can see it they have almost translucent or transparent skin. You can see the fat just sort of clump up on their necks and their sides. And so, we give them a score as to how much fat they have. And it helps us to kind of know what condition that they're in for migrants. Some of the birds that maybe nest in the area, it's the species that breeds in the area but is a migrant. If we catch one and it's full of fat, we know that it maybe didn't breed here, but if it did, it's ready to get out of here. So we talked a little bit about the shorebird having this prolonged migration, but as the season progresses, we'll notice changes in the types of birds that are migrating through. So timing can be really interesting to keep track of. Right now, warbler migration is starting to pick up, so a lot of the songbirds and especially warblers are starting to come through in larger numbers. Once we get into mid to late September, that's really when warbler diversity and songbird diversity in general is going to be highest. As we move into October, we'll start to see some of those warbler species drop out of the mix, and we'll pick up more sparrows and thrushes. And overall, we're going to see the diversity drop, but the numbers skyrocket. We're going to see large numbers of sparrows and thrushes move through in October. And that's about when waterfowl migration starts as well. Once November hits, a lot of the songbirds are already through, but that's really about the peak of waterfowl migration. So a lot of ducks and we'll see a lot of them out in places like this. Really pick up high diversity in numbers. And then as we creep into December, migration is slowing down, but we're starting to get potentially some of those interesting boreal waterfowl species. You can maybe get some scoters and grebes in some of the larger lakes throughout the state, especially if it's a cold winter farther north and a lot of the water is freezing. They're moving south to get to open water, and so you can have scoters and really interesting grebe species as well. So it can be interesting. More mergansers may move down as well, and so yeah, just something interesting to keep track of. As the season progresses, you're going to see change in that species community. spots like this can be deceiving. You know, they just look like another farm field or farm field adjacent, but we have a really nice mix of habitat here which can produce a lot of great birding opportunities. So the corn stubble out here can be great during the breeding season and during the winter. During the breeding season, areas like this are really great for breeding horned larks and vesper sparrows. Both of those species are grassland birds, but really like more of that bare ground stubble area. Adjacent to that, we have a lot of this high wet grass. So we could get common yellowthroats, swamp sparrow potentially even in some of these areas. And it's dry right now, but this is probably a really nice wetland at other times of the year. And I suspect once we get a little bit of rain here over the next couple weeks, this will be great as well. So when we have mud like this, it can be great for shorebirds as well. And there are some mud flats out on the river as well. Shorebird migration is prolonged. It started already, you know, by June. Some of those boreal shorebirds were already moving and passing through. So really between now and the end of October, we're going to get continued shorebird movement in these areas with exposed mud. Can be really great, especially once we get a little bit of water in them to host some of these. So great place to bring a spotting scope and a pair of binoculars out and just check out the diversity of habitats throughout here. Typically when I go out birding, something I do every time is keep an eBird checklist. eBird is a website that is a citizen science portal, so anybody can create an account and contribute their observations to eBird. And it's a wonderful way to, no matter what level experience you are for birding, to contribute to a bird survey or citizen science. And these data that have been collected by volunteers all over the world are now being used for really advanced population modeling and conservation action. And so it doesn't really require any level of expertise. If you only know how to identify 2 or 3 species, you can submit those 2 or 3 species. So you can do this with your smartphone. There's an app that you can download. You can also do it from a website too. The nice thing about the phone app is that if you give it permission to, it will actually track your progress. So you don't have to worry about the amount of time that you spent, because one thing that we as scientists who use those data want is effort associated with it. Like how long did it take you before you actually saw that bird? The nice thing about the app is that if you just click start and then go out on birding and click end when you're done, it will record the time that you spent in the field, and it will also, if you allow GPS tracking, it will show everywhere you went. So it calculates the area covered and associated with that too. But the nice thing about that is you could start a checklist, and you can tick every species that you see. So we saw Canada goose across the road, so there were 2 of them, I believe, sitting on that pond. So I just double click there. I've got 2 Canada goose. And every time that I see another species, I can add that one on here. We can filter it, so it's really easy to use. We saw a red-bellied woodpecker here. And anyway, you can do this for all the species that you see. There's also the option to add photos, videos, breeding evidence codes. If you were out during the nesting season and you saw fledged young or you found a nest, you can add that information as well. One thing I'm definitely going to submit to eBird, probably when I get home, since I wasn't keeping a checklist on my phone, is that black-throated blue warbler that we just saw. As I mentioned, that is not a species that nests here in Ohio. It's just a transient migrant. So I want to capture that in the data set. And those data are really valuable. eBird has now become the largest biological database on the planet. People from all over the world are using eBird every day. If you like bird watching and you keep track of the species that you see, it's actually a handy way to keep track of your life list. I didn't start using eBird until about 10 years ago, long after I had started birding. So I still have some old historical checklists that I need to get into that as well. So I actually have no idea what my life list is at. But for those of you who get excited about those things, eBird provides a lot of really great summary and tracking tools for you to keep track of all the birds that you see everywhere.